Cruz. New York is a special place in many ways because it is the center of Wall Street and so many of these big financial institutions. There's a tremendous amount of money there. But there's a great many politicians in New York who tend to lean very, very far left. You can see that shining example in the Bronx area with AOC, who is a wild child and has been a lightning rod, but is consistently elected and has high approval ratings because many of the people in her district agree with her on social issues. And what we're seeing now, as we're joined by David Dulio, is that there is a brand new mayoral candidate who very likely will get the nod from the Democrats. And he is very, very far left on social issues and has called himself a democratic socialist. Many have called him a communist, factually untrue. But we can see where they're coming from. And now we have President Trump threatening to withhold funding should he not, quote unquote, behave. David Dulio, Distinguished Professor of Political Science Department at Oakland University, Center for Civic Engagement. David, I think you need to teach us how to engage civilly today. How can we do that?
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it is quite a stretch these days when we think about discourse and all of the rancor and vitriol that's there. It used to be pretty common that folks would disagree and it wouldn't go any further than that. But now, of course, we see scenes playing out all over the country where the rancor is just increasing. So, a lot of folks could use a civility lesson these days.
Yeah, so as a jumping off point to this is very, very fascinating stuff. Regardless if you agree or disagree fundamentally in terms of your core values, this particular gentleman, Zohar Mamdani, who was in this New York State Assembly for quite some time, I think since 2020, is likely going to be the Democratic candidate. Does Trump have the right at the federal level to threaten to withhold federal funds because he doesn't like what's being said or issued or policy, even though, unlike universities and other places, this man might be voted in by his own constituents? Does Trump have that power?
In a word, no. And, we've seen President Trump mention this tactic previously. And it's important to note that he's not the first president to try it. But the courts have been pretty clear that once dollars have been appropriated by Congress for specific actions or policies or programs, those appropriated funds must be spent in that way. So the president's hands are tied somewhat in terms of not following through on those commitments made in law, actually.
Right. So there very likely could be empty threats that's just more kind of bombasticness than real weight. But what is the primary concern of the voters outside of New York when you look at something that's being talked about, like safe injection sites and city-owned supermarkets? I mean, that's where you get into the kind of pseudo-communism talk where it's like, does the state really have the right to own grocery stores and set pricing? And if so, do they start driving out all of the money in New York that makes the world go round there? So there's a lot of threats on the table should someone as kind of radical in a relative sense as this guy gets in. Is Trump just trying to kind of stir the pot a little bit and get people alarming them to how dangerous something like that could be? Is that his plan as you see it?
I think that the president, as we've seen, since really the first day of his time on the national political scene, he's very effective at using rhetoric and using it, through exaggeration or hyperbole, and it gets people's attention. So, I think that he's among the many voices, I think, on the right and from the Republican side who are trying to ring the alarm bells about what electing Mr. Mamdani might mean for the city of New York.
Mm-hmm. And there's recent examples. I mean, San Francisco would certainly be one of them. Many of the same things in terms of the safe injection sites and tent cities and sanctuary type behavior. But this is a whole new level now. This guy's been there. He was born in that area. He comes from that area. There's a grassroots desire there in an area that is so immensely expensive to live to equalize the playing field a little bit. And that's where you started to get into, very binary politics in terms of bifurcating between those who serve the wealthy and those who provide the wealth for the area to even exist in the first place. So what is being mislabeled about this candidate by the mainstream media? When I hear the word communist, that seems like a massive jump, but I know why they're doing it, and they're not entirely wrong. Like, how do you see it?
Well, I think that you make a really good point about sort of the binary nature that most folks want to sort of distill our politics into, when the vast majority of issues and policies and problems that are on the table are far from binary, right? In fact, they are incredibly complex with different facets and factors and dynamics, right? So to simplify it so far down is problematic, just because it doesn't give you the range of issues or of considerations is probably a better word. What are they missing? So the label of communist, I think means something very specific, but I think the folks that are using it are trying to use it as a heuristic, as a shorthand, as a
Sure.
One word that sends a lot of information to people about his ideal policies. And we're even starting to see more and more from him come out about past statements and ideas. I saw a post on X today that was him saying, the goal is to take over the modes of production, and now that's pretty. That's pretty radical, right? Especially here in the United States, where that's very foreign to us. So I think you're just going to see more and more of that kind of talk.
So, but he's telling people that this guy, Zaharn Mamdani, it's a very hard last name to say without stumbling over it. He is telling the lower echelon income, for example, voters in New York, I realize that you're hurting. It's hard to get ahead. We'll provide daycare free. We'll have free busing. If you're hooked on drugs, we'll make sure that you at least get access to clean needles and have a safe place to do it, so you're not, hiding in the shadows. We will take more from the rich to fund some of these programs. The threat there to those who are leaning fiscally right is to say, if we start really penalizing the wealthier people in that particular area, and it's a very, very hard area to live in at middle income, that they'll just flee. They'll leave and implode the entire thing. So you might start out with the best of intentions for the masses, but then implode the very thing that keeps them going.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a big fear for many policymakers in New York, is that there is a mass exodus of wealth from the city, because that just peels away at the tax base. But at the same time, I think that, and I don't know at what point that becomes a problem. Like, how many of those millionaires and billionaires would have to leave for it to be consequential for city government, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But let's also not forget that many of his voters are who are certainly on the left, but are also wealthy and also responded to that message that he had. And he did very well on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which, as you know, is got a lot of wealth. And, so it's not just, one segment of the Democratic base that has supported him. It's many.
So the fundamental question, again, David Dulio joining us from Oakland University. This is such a great conversation. I wish I could have you back on. Maybe Brian can arrange that, because there's a bigger question here. If we are not just one big gigantic state, if we are indeed 50 individual states with duly elected officials that are representative, indicative of the core values that they win over with a majority, does the federal government, who has allocated money to each state based on population and based on internal funding, do they have the right to ever threaten to withhold the purse strings? I think the answer is no.
I would agree with that. I think the case law and law is pretty clear on this, and actually it is a perfect example of our federalist system at work that has that has been in place for 240 some years.
Right. That's the Republic talking. Thank you very much, David, for joining the program. Let's hear from you on that.